The sun was slowly setting over the deep south, painting the asphalt in shades of orange and gold. The humid Mississippi air shimmered above the road, and the sound of cicadas filled the stillness of the evening. A faded blue pickup truck crawled down the empty highway, its engine humming softly. Behind the wheel sat Martha Lewis, 72 years old, a black widow, retired schoolteacher, and one of the last souls in Clinton who still believed that kindness wasn't weakness. It was courage. She was driving home after delivering food baskets to the local shelter when something ahead caught her eye. A motorcycle stranded on the shoulder. Next to it stood a large man in a leather jacket, his hands greasy, his boot kicking the tire in frustration. Even from afar, she could read the bold red letters stitched across his back. Hell's Angels. For a moment, Martha hesitated. Every story she'd ever heard about that name whispered danger, violence, drugs, chaos. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. Maybe it was safer to just keep driving. But something in her heart, maybe stubborn faith, maybe the echo of her late husband's voice, refused to let her pass. She pulled over, turned off the engine, and stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath her old brown shoes. "Everything all right, son?" she asked, her voice warm but firm. The man looked up, startled. His eyes were pale blue, tired, guarded, the kind of eyes that had seen too much. "Yeah, ma'am, just a flat," he muttered, almost embarrassed. Martha smiled gently. "Well then," she said, brushing her hands together, "let's see what we can do about it." In that quiet instant, something subtle shifted in the air, an invisible bridge between two worlds that were never meant to meet. One shaped by faith, the other by regret, and neither of them knew it yet. But that brief moment on a dusty Mississippi road was about to change both of their lives forever. Morning light filtered softly through the lace curtains of Martha Lewis's small house on Clinton Road. The smell of old wood, coffee, and magnolia trees carried through the air, that gentle, familiar perfume that reminded her of the life she had built and the lives she had lost. She had lived there alone for 15 years now, ever since Henry, her husband of 42 years, passed away quietly in his sleep. The world had grown quieter since then. Sundays were lonelier, and even the church hymns didn't echo in her chest like they used to. But Martha, being who she was, learned to fill the silence with purpose. She cooked for the homeless, visited the sick, and wrote little letters of encouragement to people she barely knew. She believed with all her heart that the smallest kindness could still make a dent in a cold world. The night before, she had helped that biker, Jack Turner, he had introduced himself, change his tire. He had been awkward at first, hesitant to accept help from a frail old woman. But as minutes turned to hours and sweat turned into laughter, something softened in him. He had told her bits of his story, how he'd served in Afghanistan, how he'd lost his brother, how the road became the only place that made sense afterward. He didn't share much, but it was enough for Martha to see that behind the tattoos and the steel exterior, there was still a boy who had once believed in something good. That morning, as she sat at her kitchen table sipping black coffee from her chipped porcelain mug, she smiled at the memory. She thought about how strange life could be, how a random stop on the road could make her feel, for a brief moment, less invisible. She brushed off the thought and turned her attention to her small garden outside. There were tomatoes to water, a fence to mend, and another long, quiet day ahead. But then came the sound, a low, deep rumble that didn't belong in the calm of her neighborhood. At first she thought it was thunder. Then it grew louder, closer, the kind of sound that makes windows tremble and hearts skip a beat. Martha frowned and stepped out to her porch, shielding her eyes from the bright morning sun. And there they were, a line of motorcycles, at least 10 of them, roaring down her street like a slow-moving storm. Her heart tightened. For a brief, fearful second, she thought she might have made a mistake helping that man. The bike stopped right in front of her gate. The engines went silent, one by one, leaving behind a heavy stillness. The leader removed his helmet. It was Jack. He looked different in daylight, less dangerous somehow. He raised a hand and smiled nervously. "Morning, Miss Martha," he said, his voice rough but respectful. "Hope we didn't scare you." Martha's hand rested over her chest. "Lord, son, what on earth is all this?" Jack chuckled, scratching his beard. Just a little thank you." Before she could respond, the other bikers, men and women, all in leather and denim, began unloading things from their saddlebags: wooden planks, paint cans, gardening tools, even a brand new mailbox. Martha stood frozen on her porch, completely speechless. Within minutes they were everywhere, hammering, painting, trimming her hedges, fixing the squeaky fence she'd been meaning to repair for years. The quiet house that had known nothing but solitude suddenly pulsed with noise, laughter, and life. She didn't know whether to cry or laugh. "You don't have to do this," she kept saying, but Jack only shook his head. "No, ma'am, you didn't have to stop on that road either." Inside, something cracked open in her chest, something that had been locked away since Henry died. It wasn't just gratitude, it was recognition. The realization that kindness still echoed back, even if it took years, even if it came riding on 2 wheels and wearing leather. Hours passed, and the yard began to transform. The peeling white fence was now bright and new. The broken porch step was solid again. Someone had even fixed her old wind chime that hadn't sung in a decade. When they finally finished, Jack approached her with something in his hand, a small wooden box. Inside was a miniature model of a motorcycle, handcrafted and painted silver, with her name engraved on the seat: Martha, the angel who stopped. Tears welled in her eyes. "Oh, Jack, this is too much," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jack looked down, swallowing hard. "It's not enough, Mom. You reminded me there's still good people out here, people worth slowing down for." There was a long silence between them, filled with everything neither of them knew how to say. The morning sun was high now, lighting her face with that soft golden glow that made her seem timeless, like one of those souls who carried light wherever they went, even without trying. Before the bikers left, they stood in a circle around her front yard. Jack asked if he could say a prayer, something he hadn't done in 20 years. Martha nodded, and the group bowed their heads as his gravelly voice broke through the quiet air. "For the ones we've lost," he said, "and for the angels we still find along the way." When the engines roared again, and the dust rose behind them, Martha stood alone on her porch, clutching the little silver motorcycle to her heart. The wind carried the faint echo of their engines, but what stayed with her was the feeling that for the first time in a long time, the world had looked back and smiled at her. That day, as the sun set over Clinton Road once more, Martha realized something simple yet profound. Sometimes the past doesn't come to haunt you, it comes to thank you. The road had always been home for Jack Turner, not by choice, but by survival. To most people, the sound of roaring engines and the smell of gasoline meant chaos. To him, they were the only things that drowned out the ghosts. Long before the leather jacket, before the tattoos and the reputation that came with riding under the Hells Angels patch, Jack had been just a small-town boy from Peoria, Illinois. His father worked in a factory, his mother at a diner. They didn't have much, but they had laughter, and on summer nights the windows stayed open, so the smell of his mother's cornbread drifted through the whole block. Those were the only days Jack ever remembered feeling safe. But life has a way of breaking gentle things. When Jack was 16, his father died in a factory accident, a malfunctioning press that crushed everything in a second. His mother fell apart soon after, disappearing into a haze of pills and late shifts. By 18, Jack had already traded schoolbooks for a duffel bag and joined the US Army, chasing purpose and escape in the same breath. War didn't fix him. It only taught him how to hide pain behind silence. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan, watched brothers fall in sand that swallowed everything, and came back to a country that didn't know what to do with broken men. He tried to rebuild once, married young, to a woman named Lydia, who believed that love could heal him. They had a son, Eli, who inherited his father's blue eyes and quietness. For a while things were good, until they weren't. The nightmares came, the drinking followed, and the anger he didn't understand began to leak into every conversation, every slammed door, every night he drove off just to breathe. Then one evening, after too many drinks and too few apologies, Lydia packed a small bag and left with their boy. She didn't scream, didn't curse, she just left a note on the kitchen table that said, "You need to find yourself before you lose everything." By the time Jack sobered up enough to chase them, they were gone. The leather jacket came a year later, a gift or maybe a curse depending on how one looks at it. He met the Hells Angels not in a bar fight or through crime, but through a funeral. One of the men he'd served with had taken his own life. At the wake, Jack met a group of bikers who had also served. They weren't saints, far from it, but they understood something most people didn't. Pain doesn't disappear, it rides with you. They took him in, not to fix him, but to make sure he didn't drown alone. The leather, the noise, the miles, they became armor, a way to keep the world at a distance. For years, Jack lived like that. City after city, highway after highway, no roots, no destination. He told himself he preferred it that way, that freedom meant not caring. But the truth was simpler. He was running from silence. Every time the engine stopped, the memories came roaring back. His father's crushed hand, his mother's slurred words, Lydia's letter, his son's empty room. He couldn't face them, so he kept moving. Until that day in Mississippi. He'd been riding alone, separated from his group after an argument. He couldn't even remember what it was about. Pride, maybe, or the usual nonsense that fills the void. The sky was heavy with heat, and the bike's engine had been stalling for miles. When the tire finally blew on that deserted road, he cursed, threw his helmet and sat there, sweat dripping down his face, staring at the horizon as if it might swallow him whole. That's when she appeared, Martha Lewis in her old blue truck, moving slow like time itself. He remembered how small she looked stepping out of that vehicle, and yet how her presence filled the entire space around them. No fear, no judgment, no curiosity, just concern. She didn't ask who he was or what he'd done. She just saw a man in trouble and decided to help. It was the first time in years someone had looked at him without seeing the patch, the reputation, or the weight he carried. That night, after she fed him cornbread and black coffee, Jack slept in his sleeping bag under the stars behind her house. He couldn't remember the last time someone had offered him warmth without asking for something in return. And somewhere between the crickets and the smell of magnolia trees, he felt something shift, a flicker of peace he didn't know how to name. The next morning, before dawn, he sat on the steps of her porch and stared at the house, trying to understand what that feeling was. It wasn't romance or pity. It was belonging, something he thought he'd lost forever. And in that silence, the idea was born. To return, to do something for her, to remind himself that he could still give, not just take. That maybe redemption wasn't a grand gesture, but a simple one. Fixing a fence, repainting a wall, saying thank you. When he told his crew about her the next day, they laughed at first. "An old lady," one of them said. "You're getting soft, brother." But Jack didn't flinch. He told them her name, her story, and something in his voice must have cracked open their walls too, because by morning they were packing supplies and heading to Clinton Road. That day changed him, not because he had done something heroic, but because it reminded him who he used to be. The boy from Peoria who believed in small good things. The soldier who once promised to protect. The father who still hoped his son might forgive him someday. And as he rode away from Martha's house after fixing her fence, the wind hitting his face felt different, cleaner, lighter. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from the past. He was driving toward it. He didn't know if he'd ever find peace. But for the first time, he knew where to start. The days after visiting Martha Lewis felt different, like a heavy fog had finally begun to lift from Jack Turner's chest. The roar of the engine didn't sound like noise anymore. It sounded like breathing. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost wandering through towns that never remembered his name. The image of that old woman waving from her porch lingered in his mind, bright and stubborn, like sunlight that refused to fade. She had looked at him with something he hadn't seen since his mother died. Faith. Faith in people. Faith in goodness. Faith that maybe the world wasn't entirely broken. That look haunted him in the gentlest way possible. It made him question every mile he had ridden running from himself. He rode south for 3 more days before stopping at a small roadside motel outside Mobile, Alabama. The room was simple, 1 bed, a flickering lamp, and a Bible with curled pages left in the drawer. He threw his jacket over the chair, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the blank wall for a long time. There was a quiet that pressed against his chest, the kind of quiet that demands honesty. He poured himself a shot of whiskey, but halfway through lifting it to his lips, he set it down. For once, he didn't want to drown it. He wanted to face it. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded photograph, Lydia and Eli, taken years ago in front of a Christmas tree. His son must have been 7, maybe 8, grinning with a missing front tooth. Lydia's smile was small, tired, but still full of grace. He stared at that picture until the room blurred. All these years, he'd carried it close, not because he had hope, but because he didn't know how to let go. That night, something inside him broke open, not in a violent way, but in the quiet surrender of a man realizing how much life he had wasted, building walls around an empty heart. Jack found a notepad in the drawer, the kind motels leave for phone messages. The pen barely worked, but it was enough. He didn't plan what to say. The words came out rough, hesitant at first, then flowed like a confession that had been waiting for too long. "Dear Eli," he wrote, "you probably don't remember much about me. Maybe that's for the best. I was a man who didn't know how to be one. I thought being tough meant being silent. I thought running from pain meant I could outride it. But I was wrong. I've spent years on the road pretending I didn't care. But the truth is I never stopped thinking about you, not one day. You're 23 now, maybe 24. I wouldn't blame you if you hated me. I deserve that. I just hope that wherever you are, you're nothing like me. Or maybe that you found a way to forgive what I couldn't fix." He paused, his hand trembling slightly. The pen left small dots of ink where he hesitated. He looked again at the photo. Lydia's eyes seemed to be looking right through him, as if she had known he would end up here, alone, lost, reaching for something already gone. He kept writing. "I met someone, son. Not in the way you think. Her name's Martha. She's old kind, and she helped me when I didn't deserve it. She reminded me what grace looks like. I helped her too, just a little, but the truth is she helped me more. She made me believe that maybe it's not too late to do one thing right. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but if you do, I just want you to know that your father is trying to be better, even if no one's watching." When he finished, he signed his name slowly, like it was a prayer. Jack Turner. He folded the paper carefully, slipped it into an envelope he found in his bag, and wrote Eli Turner on the front. For a long while, he just sat there staring at it. He could almost see his son's face, older now, maybe with a job, maybe with a family of his own. What would he think getting a letter from a man who had vanished 2 decades ago? Would he open it, tear it apart, burn it? The next morning, Jack found himself outside a small post office. The sky was grey and the air smelled like rain. He stood by the mailbox, letter in hand, feeling its weight, not from the paper, but from everything it carried. Guilt, hope, apology. His thumb hovered over the slot, but he couldn't let go. Something deep inside him whispered that this letter wasn't for his son. It was for himself, the part that still needed to forgive the man he used to be. After a long breath, he tucked the letter back into his jacket and walked away. The sound of the rain followed him, steady and cleansing. That night he rode until the road blurred into darkness. Somewhere between the thunder and the wind, he began to cry. Not like a child, but like a man finally allowing himself to feel. Each tear carried years of silence, and when they were gone, he felt lighter. He pulled over, parked his bike under a bridge, and looked up at the storm breaking over the sky. Lightning flashed, and for a brief moment, he whispered, "I'm still here." When dawn came, he placed the unopened letter in the glove box of his motorcycle. It would stay there for months, through miles, storms, and nights of doubt, until the day he'd finally find the courage to deliver it. But that morning, something had already changed. The man who had spent years running from his past had finally stopped. He wasn't healed, not yet, but he was facing the right direction. He started the engine, the leather of his jacket heavy on his shoulders, and whispered into the wind, "Thank you, Martha." And for the first time in years, he felt like maybe, just maybe, God was listening. It had been nearly 8 months since Jack Turner had last seen the little house on Clinton Road. 8 months since a woman with silver hair and steady eyes had looked at him and called him son without a trace of fear. In that time, the world had stretched out like an endless highway of questions. He'd ridden through rain and dust, through cities that blurred together, through nights that smelled of smoke and old memories. Yet no matter how far he went, he could never shake the feeling that something in him had been left behind. Something good, something fragile, something he wasn't sure he deserved to reclaim. The letter to Eli still sat in his motorcycle's glove box, edges worn, words beginning to fade where the paper had absorbed the sweat of his hands. He'd opened it more times than he cared to admit, reading his own words as if they belonged to another man. Each time he thought about sending it, and each time fear stopped him. Fear that silence was safer than rejection. Fear that his son had learned to live without him. But the thought of Martha Lewis, of her quiet faith, her unshakable belief that kindness still mattered, kept whispering to him on lonely nights. It was that whisper that finally made him turn his bike back toward Mississippi. He reached Clinton at dusk. The same warm air hung heavy with magnolia and dust. The same crooked mailbox stood at the corner of the road, its white paint chipped and faded. As he slowed the bike, his chest tightened. He remembered the laughter of that day, the way the other riders had fixed her fence, the way Martha had cried when he handed her the little silver motorcycle. It had felt like a beginning then, redemption in motion. But as he turned onto the gravel path leading to her house, something felt different. The place was too still. The house was there, the same porch, the same wind chimes that sang faintly in the evening air, but the yard looked overgrown, the flowers dry, the garden tools rusting by the fence. Jack cut the engine and sat for a moment, the silence pressing against his chest like a weight. He got off the bike, walked up the creaking steps and knocked gently on the door. No answer. He tried again, louder this time. Nothing but the low hum of cicadas. After a long pause, he walked around to the back, calling softly, "Miss Martha, it's Jack." His voice sounded smaller than he expected. The screen door was slightly open, and through the window he saw dust dancing in the golden light. Everything inside looked frozen in time. A book left open on the table, a teacup by the sink, a shawl draped neatly over a chair. It was as if she'd just stepped out for a moment and never returned. From across the yard, a voice startled him. "You looking for Miss Lewis?" Jack turned to see a middle-aged woman standing by the fence holding a grocery bag. She had kind eyes but a somber look. "Yeah," he said slowly, taking off his sunglasses. "It's Jack Turner. I helped her out last year." The woman nodded, recognizing the name. "Oh, she talked about you plenty," she said softly. "Said you were one of the good ones." Jack's throat tightened. "Is she—" The woman took a deep breath, her voice gentle but firm. "She passed in April. Peacefully in her sleep. Heart gave out, the doctor said. She was smiling, they told me." For a long time, Jack didn't move. The air seemed to thicken around him. He looked toward the house again, his vision blurring. Martha, the woman who'd looked past his sins, who'd called him back to life, was gone. The words he wanted to say died somewhere behind his teeth. He lowered his head, whispering, "She deserved more time." The neighbor placed her hand on the fence post. "She got more than most, honey. You and your friends gave her one of the best days she ever had. She talked about that for months, said it gave her faith again." Jack swallowed hard, his voice rough. "She gave me that." The woman smiled faintly. "She had that effect." She pointed toward the porch. "Before she passed, she told me to give something to you, in case you ever came back." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden box, the same kind of box Martha had once used for her keepsakes. Jack took it carefully, his hands trembling. When he opened it, he found a folded letter on top of a small cross carved from olive wood. The handwriting was neat, but shaky. "Jack, I knew you'd come back one day. People like you always do. You think the road is yours, but truth is, it just leads you where your heart left something behind. Don't let guilt be your home. It's a cold place to live. You've carried enough pain to fill a lifetime. Now carry grace instead. Whatever you couldn't say to your boy, say it to the world. Be the man you were supposed to be. The world needs those. Love, Martha. Jack sat down on the steps, the letter trembling in his hands. For a long time he didn't speak. He just stared at the horizon, where the sun had melted into crimson light. The cicadas had gone quiet, as if the whole world were holding its breath. A single tear rolled down his face and fell on the paper, smudging her name. He stayed there until night fell, the stars rising one by one. The wooden cross rested against his palm, rough and warm, like it still carried the memory of her hands. He felt something stir inside, not sadness this time, but purpose. Maybe Martha was right. Maybe the road wasn't punishment. Maybe it was the path back to meaning. When he finally stood up, the world looked different. The grief was still there, but it no longer felt like an anchor. It felt like a promise, a quiet vow to live the kind of life that woman had believed he could. He folded her letter, tucked it into his jacket next to his own unsent one, and whispered, "You were right, ma'am, the road always leads home." Then he started the engine. The roar broke the silence, echoing down Clinton Road as the stars watched from above. And for the first time since he could remember, Jack Turner wasn't running anymore. He was riding toward something. The road stretched out before Jack Turner like an endless ribbon of memory, grey, cracked and shimmering under the southern sun. The engine hummed beneath him, steady and low like a heartbeat that had finally found its rhythm. In the pocket of his worn leather jacket were two letters, one written by a man seeking forgiveness, the other by a woman who had already given it. Between them, Jack carried the weight of two lives, the one he had lived and the one he was finally ready to begin. After Martha's death, he hadn't ridden aimlessly. For the first time in years, he rode with intention. He visited small towns and back roads, stopping in diners, motels, and forgotten gas stations, where the lost and lonely tended to drift. He talked to the men who sat alone at counters, eyes hollow, fingers trembling from old battles no one could see. He recognized the look. He had worn it himself for half a lifetime. Sometimes he'd buy them coffee, sometimes just sit and listen. He didn't preach, didn't lecture. He'd simply tell them about an old woman in Mississippi who believed that kindness was still stronger than pain. In time, those conversations became something more. One of the bikers from his old crew, Reggie, suggested they start a small charity ride, nothing fancy, just a yearly run to raise money for widows, veterans, and families in need. They called it the Angel Ride. Jack never wanted the spotlight, never wanted thanks. But the name wasn't about him, it was about Martha. Every patch they wore bore her name stitched in silver thread. Martha's Angels, Ride for Hope. And in every mile, every engine roar, he felt her presence, calm, patient, unshakably good. By the second year, dozens joined. By the third, there were hundreds. Men who'd once ridden for rebellion now rode for redemption. People came out to watch as the long column of bikes thundered through quiet towns, veterans, single mothers, and kids waving flags. Jack always rode in front, head high, wind tugging at his beard, eyes on the horizon. The old pain was still there, but it no longer ruled him. It had become part of the fuel, something transformed by purpose. Late one evening after one of the rides, he found himself alone on a hill overlooking a small town bathed in the glow of sunset. He took off his helmet, set it beside him, and looked out at the world with a kind of peace he hadn't known since childhood. He reached into his jacket and pulled out Martha's letter once more. The edges were worn now, the ink faded, but her words still breathed. "Don't let guilt be your home." He had lived by that line every day since. He looked up at the sky and smiled faintly. "You did it, ma'am," he whispered. "You got me home." Then he unfolded the other letter, the one addressed to his son. It had traveled thousands of miles inside his jacket, unread by anyone but him. For years he had treated it like a gravestone, a marker of who he used to be. But that evening, with the sun dying red over the fields, he finally felt ready. He took out his phone, opened an old contact he hadn't dialed in 20 years, and stared at the number for a long time. His thumb hovered over the call button, and for a moment he could almost hear Martha's voice again. "Whatever you couldn't say to your boy, say it to the world." He smiled. that tired, grateful smile of a man who finally understands that life's second chances rarely look the way we expect. He didn't call, not yet. Some things need to ripen in silence, but he made himself a promise. The next angel ride would start in Peoria, Illinois, the place where his boy had grown up, the place he had once fled from. Maybe Eli wouldn't come. Maybe he would. Either way, Jack would ride through that town, head held high, not as the man who left, but as the one who finally came back. As twilight deepened, fireflies began to dance over the tall grass. The wind carried the faint echo of distant engines, other riders catching up, other souls chasing their own salvation. Jack stood, brushed the dust from his jeans, and looked down the hill toward the winding road. He thought about all the people he had met since that day on Clinton Road, the waitress who cried when he paid for her groceries, the veteran who said the ride had saved his life, the young boy who called him Sir and asked if Martha was an angel for real. Jack had smiled and said, "The real ones don't need wings, kid, just courage." He kicked the stand of his bike, climbed on, and started the engine. The roar shattered the stillness, echoing through the valley. In that sound, he heard everything: his father's laughter, his mother's voice, Lydia's goodbye, Martha's wisdom. Every mistake, every loss, every small act of grace that had built the man he had become. He wasn't running anymore, and he wasn't done either. The road didn't end. It just kept calling. As he rode into the night, the stars unfolded above him like a map, one he didn't need to read anymore. He knew where he was going. He wasn't searching for forgiveness now. He was living it. Each mile was a prayer, each sunrise a reminder that redemption doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in movement, in trying, in choosing to get back on the road no matter how many times you fall. Somewhere far behind him, the wind carried the faint chime of an old porch bell, the one Martha used to hang on her door. Jack smiled beneath his helmet, eyes glistening. "I'll keep it going, Mum," he murmured. "I promise." And as the highway disappeared into the horizon, the story of Jack Turner, the soldier, the sinner, the rider, became something larger than himself. It became a legacy of mercy, of faith restored, of love that outlives the hands that give it. Because some journeys don't end when the road does, some rides never stop. And for Jack Turner, this was one of them, the ride that never ends.